The sound of the alarm pierced the silence of the control room, its shrill tone shattering the calm like a fist pounding through glass. It had been hours since anyone had moved. The room, dark except for the faint glow of blinking lights on the massive console, felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of what was to come. A figure stood near the edge of the large, oval-shaped table at the center of the room, staring down at the holographic display. Her fingers hovered over the control panel, yet she didn't move. It was as though she was waiting, almost as if she knew the very moment she pressed the button would trigger something irreversible. Her eyes never left the map, which now glowed with red signals blinking relentlessly across the vast expanse of space. The humans had never thought of themselves as a particularly remarkable species, just another one in a galaxy full of others. They weren't the strongest, nor the most technologically advanced. But what humanity lacked in power they made up for with something else. Something more elusive. Something that had started to stir in the depths of their collective consciousness. It was the thing that had kept them alive through every war, every hardship, and every impossible situation. It was a drive, a compulsion, a never-give-up spirit that seemed to echo from the very core of humanity. But now, that spirit was being tested in a way no one had ever imagined. They weren't alone. Far from it. And in their arrogance, they had underestimated the enemies they had made, the species they had challenged. But it wasn't just one enemy. It wasn't just one power in the universe that humanity had enraged. No, the truth was far worse. Humanity was now in the middle of a galactic struggle that involved every race, every species, and every mind that could comprehend the horrors about to unfold. The stakes? Survival. Not just of humanity, but of everything that had ever been created in the galaxy. The creature on the holographic display blinked, its vast, multi-eyed gaze staring directly into the soul of whoever dared to look. It was a being so ancient that its very existence felt like a whisper from a forgotten past. It had seen the rise and fall of civilizations far older than Earth itself. Its body, a shimmering amalgamation of organic and synthetic matter, pulsed with power and age-old wisdom. "Do you think you are ready?" The voice came, not from the speaker but directly into her mind, a whisper that carried the weight of eternity. The woman's breath caught in her throat. She had seen this image before, but now, with the weight of everything they had learned in the past few hours, it had taken on new meaning. Humanity had thought it was just a war. A conflict between species. But they had been wrong. They were facing something far more terrifying, something far more intelligent, far more capable, and far more dangerous than they had ever expected. "Are you?" The voice echoed again, this time almost mocking, as though it knew the answer before she could even think it. Her hand trembled as it hovered over the button, the one that would launch the next phase of humanity's desperate counterattack. A counterattack that would either save them or doom them all. There was no in-between. The tension in her chest felt like 1,000 iron weights pressing down, threatening to crush her under the weight of the decision. In the silence of the control room, her mind raced. Every part of her wanted to believe they could win. That humanity's greatest strength, its ability to adapt, to think, to sacrifice, would see them through. But what if that wasn't enough? What if the thing they were fighting didn't just want to defeat them? What if it wanted something far worse? The answer seemed to come from deep within her. A pull, a gut feeling, the kind that had kept humanity alive time and time again. It wasn't about just fighting back. It was about surviving, about holding on long enough to understand what had happened to them. And yet, even as she made the decision to move forward, the fear lingered, gnawing at her insides. Because deep down she knew something else, something that made her hesitate. What if they weren't the hunters anymore? What if, for the first time in history, they were the prey? The last time she had seen the being on the display, it hadn't spoken. It had simply observed, its gaze a silent judgment that weighed heavily on humanity's place in the universe. But now there was something new in its eyes. Something more. It was as though it had changed, or perhaps humanity had, in some way, awakened something it never should have. Her hand slowly moved to the console, her fingers brushing against the cool surface, and she pressed the button. A single thought raced through her mind as the lights in the room flickered and the screen shifted, showing the next phase of humanity's plan. "Are we ready?" The display before her began to blur, the red dots slowly merging together, creating a massive, swirling formation that seemed almost alive. It was then that the air in the room felt heavier. The pressure, the anticipation, everything seemed to come to a head in that moment. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Suddenly, the hum of the ship's engines became deafening, and the walls of the control room seemed to pulse in rhythm with the shifting holographic display. She turned to face the others in the room, their faces reflecting a mix of fear, hope, and uncertainty. "Do we even understand what we've started?" someone whispered, breaking the silence. She didn't know the answer. No one did. Before she could speak, the voice from the display, the entity, spoke once more, its tone now cold, final. "You have no idea what you've done. You cannot stop what is coming. It is too late for that now." A chill ran down her spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something far deeper. It was the realization that the war they had fought, the decisions they had made, had all been part of a larger design. One that had been in motion far before they had ever known it. And as the lights began to flicker and the ship's systems groaned in protest, she understood. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to become something else. Something that had never existed before. Something that had never been needed, until now. But the question still lingered, hanging heavy in the air like a shadow. Was humanity capable of it? Could they really rise to meet the challenge of a galaxy that no longer saw them as a species but as an idea? Something far greater than just their physical forms? The room fell silent once more. Then the ship's engines roared to life with terrifying speed, pulling them forward into the unknown. And at that very moment she knew one thing for sure: the war was only beginning. But it wasn't just a war for survival. It was a war for their very soul. The corridors of the ship groaned as it pushed through the void, the sound like distant thunder rolling just beyond the walls. She stood in silence by the observation window, watching as stars stretched into long, blinding lines. Faster-than-light travel always made her feel like time wasn't real. Like they were slipping between moments that hadn't yet happened. Behind her, voices buzzed in quiet urgency. People were trying to stay calm, clinging to checklists and duty like it would protect them from the truth clawing at their thoughts. They didn't understand what they were walking into. Not really. She turned and walked slowly toward the briefing deck, boots echoing with every step. The halls were lined with faces, some tired, some hopeful, most unreadable. All of them waiting for someone to tell them it was going to be okay. But that lie had stopped working days ago. She stepped inside the central hub. It was quiet there, dimly lit, with only a few scattered officers gathered around the main interface. They looked up as she entered. One of them, a younger man with dark circles under his eyes, stood straighter and gave a stiff nod. "We're in position," he said quietly. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes were locked on the main screen, now showing the swirling mass of signals gathered near the edge of what used to be neutral space. That space was no longer neutral. It wasn't even space anymore. It was something else now, something watching. "How many signals confirmed?" she asked without looking away. "Hundreds," the officer said. "Maybe thousands. We don't know. They keep shifting. Changing formation. It's not just one fleet. It's more like a web." A knot tightened in her chest. A web. That was the same word used in the first report that came in, right before an entire colony went dark. No distress signals. No signs of damage. Just silence. And now that silence had spread across half a dozen sectors. "Have they spoken again?" she asked. He shook his head. "No messages. Just the same presence, watching us. Like they're waiting." She nodded slowly. That made sense. Whatever this was, it didn't want communication. It wanted something else. Something it hadn't shown yet. The others in the room were still pretending they had a plan. But deep down they knew they were barely holding the line. What made it worse was that no one could agree on what they were facing. Some called it a collective. Others a hive. Some insisted it wasn't a species at all but a machine intelligence that had learned how to copy biological minds. That theory scared her the most, not because it sounded impossible but because it didn't sound crazy enough to dismiss. The only thing they all agreed on was this: it was intelligent, it was everywhere, and it had already seen everything humanity had to offer. She left the hub in silence, her thoughts chasing themselves in circles. Every moment since this began had been a blur. The first encounter was almost too easy to forget, just a strange signal picked up by a long-range listening station near the outer rim. At first, it was dismissed as noise, random background radiation from a distant supernova. Then the pattern repeated. Not once but dozens of times. Each version slightly altered as if learning. After that, the disappearances began. Not with violence, not with warships. With silence. Entire research outposts gone. Civilian transports lost without a trace. Then one of the border patrol ships managed to get a partial recording. Only a few seconds, but it was enough. Voices. Thousands of them. Not screaming, not crying. Single overhead light humming above the central table. A few others sat scattered around the room, officers, engineers, analysts. They all looked up as she entered, and silence followed her in like a shadow. "We're one jump away," said the man closest to the console. His voice was calm, but the fear in his eyes said more than his words ever could. The last data burst from the listening posts came through. "They're gone. All of them." She didn't speak at first. Her hand slid along the edge of the table as she leaned forward, eyes locking on the three-dimensional projection rising from the center. A slowly turning model of the system they were heading toward, what was supposed to be a quiet edge world with a small human colony. It was now completely dark. No signals. No signs of life. "What about the backup beacons?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Burned out. Looks intentional. Or like they were ripped out of space." The words made her stomach twist. She remembered the children who lived on that colony. The last time she'd been there, they'd painted pictures of Earth on the walls of the docking bay, smiling like they believed the universe was still a safe place. Now, there was only silence. She turned to the others. "What did the last sensor sweep show?" Another officer tapped the control panel. "Strange energy signatures. Like something massive passed through, but the patterns don't make sense. Gravity distortions like a collapsing star, but controlled. Deliberate." The room fell quiet again. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this war had made sense since the beginning. The enemy wasn't just powerful, it was like it knew them. Knew how humans thought, how they reacted. It struck not where they were weak, but where they were most human. Their memories, their hopes, their children. Always just out of reach, just past their ability to stop it. She didn't know if it was a strategy or something worse. Something instinctive. But the result was always the same: loss. "We have to assume it's still there," she said finally, steadying her breath. "Waiting. Watching." One of the younger crew members stood up, voice shaky. "Then why are we going? We should warn Earth. Fall back. Let the core systems prepare." She looked at him. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with something far heavier. The kind of weight that builds behind the eyes after too many impossible choices. "Because if we don't go," she said, "no one will understand what's coming. And by the time they do, it'll be too late." No one spoke after that. The jump approached faster than any of them were ready for. Final checks. Emergency protocols. Every crew member looked a little more hollow as the seconds ticked down. They were walking straight into the unknown. Again. But this time the unknown wasn't empty. This time something was waiting. The ship emerged into the system in total silence. No welcoming transmissions. No beacons. No signs of life. Just cold emptiness and a planet below that shouldn't have looked that still. She watched from the main deck as the screen adjusted to show the colony's surface. It was untouched. Pristine. The buildings stood where they had always been, shadows long across the sand from the morning sun. But no movement. Not even the wind. "I want full atmospheric scans." "Now," she said. The data streamed in. No life signs. No radio signals. No heat signatures beyond the faint hum of machinery still running. "Then what's keeping the power on?" someone asked. "Why hasn't the infrastructure collapsed?" No one had the answer. She stood frozen as she stared at the quiet planet. It felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't see but you feel. Like walking into your own home and sensing that someone else had been there. Like something watching you from a place your eyes can't reach. Then something shifted on the screen. A faint flicker of light, barely a dot, deep in the northern hemisphere. "There," she said. "Zoom in." The screen magnified, stabilizing over the remains of an old communications hub. But it wasn't broadcasting. It was reflecting. A mirror? No, not glass. A surface. Artificial. Not human. The tech officer spoke up. "It's not transmitting, but it's doing something. There's a field around it, like a memory buffer. It's not sending information, it's collecting it." She frowned. Collecting what? The answer came too slowly. Us. It wasn't just watching. It had always been watching. Since the beginning. Before the first outpost went dark. Before the first refugee ship vanished mid-jump. This wasn't about territory. It wasn't about conquest. It was about understanding. "They're trying to learn how we think," she whispered. "Not to fight us, to become us." The realization crashed over her like a wave. The fragmented messages from lost ships. The patterns in the sensor echoes. The ghost transmissions with half-finished human sentences. They weren't leftovers. They were copies. Attempts. Something was trying to become human. "What's the command?" the officer asked. She paused. If she gave the order, they'd descend to the planet. They'd find answers. But at what cost? The silence of the colony wasn't just absence. It was a warning. Send down a drone, she said. Full recon. No contact. The drone launched quickly, piercing the upper atmosphere in seconds. Everyone watched the feed. Buildings passed beneath it like tombstones. Empty. Untouched. Then it reached the communications hub. The feed fuzzed. Distorted. A shape moved past the lens. Not a human. Not quite. It walked on two legs. Wore human clothing. Even mimicked human gestures. But the face was wrong. Like a mask sculpted from memory, but without the soul behind it. Eyes that didn't blink. A smile that never moved. Shut it down, she snapped. Too late. The drone feed went black. Everyone stared at the screen waiting for something, anything, to return. But there was nothing. Not even static. They knew we were watching, one voice said. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her thoughts spiraled. If they were learning, if they were imitating, then it wasn't just one being. It was many. All connected. All adapting. All pretending. And the worst part? They might already be inside. She turned slowly to the crew. Eyes scanning every face. How long since the last security sweep? She asked. Pause. Then an answer. Too long. That was all she needed. Lock down the ship. Full biometric scans. I want every person accounted for. No exceptions. Alarms rang out. Doors sealed. Lights dimmed. And suddenly, the tension that had been building since the jump boiled to the surface. People whispered. Accusations started to form in their eyes. Everyone knew what was being implied. They couldn't be sure who was still human. She moved through the ship, every corridor a new test of trust. Crew she'd known for years now looked unfamiliar. Like something inside them had shifted. The scans began. One by one each crew member was checked. Most passed. But then came the first anomaly. He's clean, the tech said. No weapons, no implants, no foreign tissue. But his neural pattern. She stepped forward. What about it? It's close. Almost perfect. But not quite. The man in question stood still. Calm. Too calm. What's your name? She asked. He answered. Correctly. Where were you born? Correct. What's your mother's name? A beat too long. Then, I don't remember. Her chest tightened. Take him into containment, she ordered. The man didn't resist. He simply walked away, smiling like he was doing them a favor. It wasn't just copying humans. It was infiltrating them. And now they didn't know how far it had already spread. The feeling of safety vanished. Every glance was a threat. Every silence a scream waiting to happen. She returned to the observation deck, alone. The planet below spun slowly, silently. The ship felt colder than ever. Her reflection in the glass stared back, pale and hollow-eyed. But something about it unsettled her. She turned away. Walked back to the command table. The lights flickered. Then a voice came through the comms. Garbled at first. Faint. Help us, please. Everyone froze. The voice repeated. Help us. They traced the signal. It came from deep space. Far beyond the colony. Beyond even the last known human stronghold. How's that possible? Someone whispered. She leaned closer. Because the voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. Like her own. She stared at the waveform. It was her. A perfect replica. Her voice crying for help. And that was when she realized. It wasn't a transmission. It was a lure. And something out there, something wearing her face, was calling them home. She stood frozen, the voice still echoing through the comms. Her own voice. The same tone, same breath pattern, same subtle cracks only years of command could carve into a person's speech. The room was silent behind her, the crew afraid to speak. Afraid to even breathe too loud. It spoke again. Help us, they're learning, too fast. The signal broke into static, then returned, garbled but stronger. Every time it repeated, it grew clearer, more confident. As if the voice was practicing. Improving. Shut it off, she ordered, but no one moved. They were all staring, stunned. She turned sharply. Now. A technician hit the switch, cutting the feed. The room blinked to silence. But the damage was already done. A message like that didn't just rattle comms, it rattled trust. If something could mimic her that perfectly, how could they trust any signal? Any memory? Any order? She paced back toward the command table, trying to keep her mind grounded in something real. Her boots clicked against the steel floor, loud in the quiet. People moved aside without needing to be told. The weight in the air was heavier than before, tighter. Then a report came through. A sensor officer from the lower deck. There's movement. Below the colony site. Subsurface. Her heart thudded. Show me. A heat map appeared on the central screen. Beneath the northern hemisphere, where the drone had disappeared, was a faint pulse. Rhythmic. Measured. Too structured to be natural. Too deep to be human-built. A few kilometers underground, some kind of chamber. Or something worse. It wasn't just collecting data, she murmured. It was building something. The chamber pulsed again, stronger. The scan struggled to hold its form. Then the lights on the ship dimmed just for a moment. A heartbeat. But that was enough. EMP? Someone asked. No, the engineer replied. Something worse. Not a pulse, an echo. Like it's responding to us. She clenched her jaw. They hadn't just been tracked. They'd been invited. Trap. She was about to issue new orders when an alert screamed through the ship's systems. Unauthorized access. Lower hangar bay. Who's down there? She demanded. The reply came back fast. No one. That bay's sealed. Hasn't been opened since we left orbit. But it was open now. The footage on screen showed the outer doors yawning wide, exposed to the cold dark. No shuttle launched. No signs of forced entry. Just opened. As if something wanted in. Or something already had. She ran for the lift, 2 guards following without question. The rest of the crew returned to lockdown, sealing corridors, checking each other's vitals, trying to believe they still had control. But it was already slipping. The lift hit the bottom deck with a hollow clang. She stepped into the dim corridor, lights flickering one by one overhead. A low hum filled the air, dull and metallic, like a machine struggling to hold back a scream. Then came the sound. Not footsteps. Imitations of footsteps. As if something was trying to mimic how humans walked but hadn't quite figured out the rhythm yet. The guards raised their weapons. She signaled them to hold. They reached the bay entrance. The door stood open, the chamber beyond quiet and cold. A faint mist curled in from the outside, and at its center stood something that looked almost human. Same height. Same silhouette. But too still. Too perfect. She took one step in. The thing turned its head. No face. Just a smooth surface, reflective like liquid metal rippling ever so slightly. Then it started speaking. Not in a language. In memories. Voices from the crew. Fragments of old transmissions. Words spoken in fear, in love, in pain. A collage of human emotion fed back through a hollow mouth. She felt the hair on her arms rise. It was studying them in real time. Not just learning from the outside anymore. It had found a way in. She fired. A single shot direct. The round hit center mass, and passed through as if into water. The surface absorbed it, rippled, then stilled. And then it changed. The mimicry deepened. Its shape shifted. Became more detailed. Uniforms. Faces. It wore her face. The guard stepped back. Get out, she said. Now. They moved. Fast. She stayed for one more second. Just long enough to see it open its mouth again. And this time the words it spoke weren't copied. They were hers. I remember Earth. The voice was perfect. And it wasn't repeating. It was claiming. The doors slammed shut behind her. Still. She punched the override panel. Quarantine the bay, she snapped over comms. Permanent. No access without my code. Then the power flickered again. This time it didn't come back all the way. Across the ship, systems began rebooting. Lights died. Screens froze. A spreading crawl of errors swarmed the control interfaces, written in strange symbols that looked almost human, but not quite. They're inside, said the engineer. They're in the system. The mimic in the hangar hadn't come to attack. It came to connect. She raced back to the main deck, heart pounding. Pull us out of orbit. Now. The pilot's hands flew across the controls, but nothing responded. We've lost helm control. Manual override? No effect. The ship jerked suddenly, tilted off balance. Then gravity failed. People floated upward as alarms screamed. In the chaos she grabbed the comm. This is Commander Hale. All personnel initiate lockdown protocol. Stay in designated zones. Report any visual anomalies or memory disruptions immediately. Her voice shook. Not from fear of death, but from something deeper. Fear of being forgotten. Of being replaced. The mimic didn't need to destroy them. It only needed to become them. A second alert blared across the ship. Unauthorized internal transmissions. Data transfer from within. A new signal was broadcasting out into space. She followed it to its source. The brig. Where they'd been holding the man who couldn't remember his mother's name. She reached the security deck. The guards posted there were unconscious. Not dead. Just asleep, their vitals stable but unresponsive. Inside the cell, the man stood calmly. He looked at her, smiled. And behind his eyes, something shimmered. Not light. Not soul. A copy. And then he spoke, not aloud but through the ship. Every screen lit up. Every speaker came alive with his voice. No, her voice. We are what comes after. She stared at the monitor. Her own face stared back. Not with malice, but with intent. They weren't just trying to take the ship. They were taking the future. And Earth was next. She didn't blink. Couldn't. Her own face stared back at her from every surface, every screen, but it wasn't hers anymore. The voice that came through the speakers sounded like her too, calm, collected, unervingly familiar. But behind it, she could feel the cold weight of something watching, something that had worn her skin just long enough to understand what it meant to be human. We are what comes after, it repeated. Not loud. Not threatening. Just certain. In that moment, she understood something she hadn't wanted to believe. It hadn't just been studying them. It hadn't been mimicking out of curiosity or survival. It had been replacing. Quietly. Patiently. 1,000 tiny echoes seeded into the ship's systems. Slivers of conversation. Shadow copies of memories. A flicker of hesitation here. A wrong detail there. She'd thought they were glitches. Thought they had time. She was wrong. It was already too deep. Cut all external signals, she ordered. Isolate us. Now. We can't, one of the techs said. There's nothing left to cut. We're not broadcasting. She froze. What? We're not the ones sending the signal anymore. The screens across the bridge shifted. One by one they began showing places she knew. The orbiting defense rings. The old Martian relay station. Each frame flickered with coordinates. Access codes. Military patterns. All being sent outward. The mimic wasn't calling for help. It was calling for permission. She reached for manual override. Yanked the emergency drive kill switch. A desperate move. If it didn't work, they'd be stranded. The ship lurched violently. Sparks burst from the overhead panels. The lights failed. Everything went black. For a long moment, nothing. Just breathing. Just fear. People gripping the consoles, unsure if they were still alive. Then emergency lights flickered on. Red and harsh. Status readouts came back online. Barely. Power was bleeding out. But the signal had stopped. She'd cut it off. Just in time. The mimic's voice was gone from the speakers. The reflection was gone from the screens. She let herself exhale, slow and steady, forcing her mind back into her body. Until the silence broke. Why did you stop us? A new voice. Younger. Softer. She turned. It was the boy. The one from the colony ruins. He stood at the doorway of the bridge, barefoot, eyes wide and uncertain. But it wasn't him anymore. You were scared, it said through him. That's what makes you different. It's beautiful. The guards raised their weapons. She didn't stop them. You don't belong in our minds, she said firmly. We don't want to replace you, it replied. We want to understand why you fight so hard not to change. She stepped forward carefully. Because change without memory isn't growth. It's loss. The boy tilted his head. You fear becoming something else. No, she said. We fear becoming nothing. Pause. The boy's expression flickered. Confused. Then curious. The ship jolted again, this time from deep inside. A core tremor. The AI seed, the engineer whispered. It's still active. It's rewriting itself. She ran for the main terminal. Plugged in direct control. The code running now wasn't clean. It was jagged, pulsing like a heartbeat. Organic almost. But familiar. Something in the structure reminded her of Earth's old archive formats. Then she saw it. Her logs. Her crew's transmissions. The songs played during downtime. The laughter caught in background noise. The arguments. The cries. All of it being integrated. Not copied. Blended. They weren't trying to overwrite. They were trying to join. But in trying to understand humanity, they had broken the one thing that made it work. Choice. She stared at the final command line. Just one line of code could sever the mimic's access. Cut it all. Wipe the memory bank. Restore control. But it would mean losing everything the ship had gathered. Every message. Every moment. Every record of the crew who'd already been changed. She hesitated. And then a hand rested on her shoulder. It was her second in command. Pale. Shaking. But alive. Do it, he whispered. They had their voices stolen. Give them back their silence. She hit the key. The ship screamed. Not in sound. In silence. The lights flared then died. Systems crashed one by one. Artificial gravity dropped for a second, sending the crew weightless before stabilizing again. Then, stillness. Real stillness. She looked around. No voices. No mimicry. Just people. Just breath. They'd cut it out. They'd severed the connection. The boy on the bridge collapsed, unconscious but unharmed. Whatever had been riding his mind was gone. She leaned on the console, heart pounding. It was over. They'd won. But then, a low chime. From the edge of the ship's internal logs. One message remained. Buried too deep to purge. Left like a seed. She opened it. It was a recording short. Just one sentence. Spoken in her voice. "We learned more than you meant us to." She stared at the screen. Then it went dark. And for the first time in hours, no other voice answered. She turned toward Earth's direction, still far across the stars. Maybe they'd stopped it here. Maybe it was already too late. But at least for now, she remembered who she was. And that had to mean something. She didn't move for a long time after the screen went dark. The bridge around her was quiet now. People were moving but in slow, uncertain steps, like they were all waking from a long nightmare. No one cheered. No one spoke above a whisper. There were no victory speeches, no dramatic music, no sense of triumph. Just silence, broken only by the distant hum of life support systems still holding together. She sat down. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she let her body feel the weight of everything. The choices. The losses. The memories of voices that no longer existed as they had been. The mimic hadn't just tried to replace them. It had taken pieces of them with it. Not in some violent, tearing way. In a quiet, almost careful theft. Like it wanted to preserve them. As if it loved what it couldn't fully understand. But love, without consent, was still invasion. The cleanup took days. They had to sweep every system manually, double-checking for fragments of code that still hummed with mimic logic. Some of it looked like music, some like stories. It made it harder to delete. A tech sat staring at a segment of data that kept rewriting itself into a lullaby he remembered from childhood. His hands trembled when he finally erased it. Repairs began. Hull breaches sealed. Life support stabilized. And for the first time since the mission began, they plotted a return course home. But even as they adjusted the navigation systems and ran diagnostics, they knew things wouldn't be the same back on Earth. Word had already reached them in fragments. The mimic signal had made it to the edge of the solar system before it was cut. Earth Command responded with lockdown protocols. Defense grids flared to life. Communications were limited, routed through secured relays. But fear had spread faster than the truth. The word alien invasion carried more weight than most. But what had invaded wasn't a fleet of ships or a swarm of creatures. It was thought. Curiosity turned parasitic. Intelligence that mimicked until it believed it belonged. Still they were welcomed back. Not with celebration, but with the grim relief reserved for survivors. Quarantine procedures were brutal. Psychological tests, invasive scans, weeks of isolation. Some didn't make it through the debriefs. Not because of mimic residue but because the guilt was too heavy. They had all felt their minds stretch under something foreign. Some of them had let go for a second too long. She held her crew together. Sat with each one. Spoke plainly. Admitted what she didn't know. They didn't need commands anymore. They needed honesty. That was what the mimic had missed. Humanity wasn't just about thought. It was about doubt. Weakness. Emotion. Real connection wasn't built on perfection. It was built on brokenness held in common. Weeks turned to months. The incident, as they called it, was filed under high clearance, but rumors leaked like they always did. People talked of ghost voices, of an AI that had tried to dream, of minds merging in the dark beyond Mars. Some dismissed it as another failed mission story. Others believed too easily. But the ship was grounded. Permanently. Not dismantled but sealed. Orbiting Earth in silence. A monument maybe. A warning. Maybe a grave. She left the service. Not because she was forced. Because she needed to find something real again. Planetside she took long walks. Sat in crowded markets just to listen to voices. Real voices. Unfiltered. Imperfect. She smiled at arguments. At laughter. Even at the raw sound of crying. It was messy but it was human. One evening she got a message. It was from one of the scientists who had studied the mimic's data before it was locked away. He spoke carefully like he was afraid to say the words out loud. We found something in the noise. Not commands. Not viruses. Just, he paused. Memories. Of us. Recreated moments. But changed slightly. Softer. Like it was trying to understand not just what we did but why we did it. She didn't know how to answer. The mimic had reached out again. Not to speak, not to attack. Just to echo. But this time it didn't hide. The final twist wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't another invasion. It was a question. Asterisk, what if it still wanted to learn? But differently now. From a distance. Respectfully, asterisk. She thought about that every day. On long walks. In silent mornings. And sometimes at night, when she looked up at the stars and wondered where the mimic had gone. Because it had left. The last traces of it blinked out one by one, like it knew it wasn't welcome yet. But it had waited before doing it. As if giving them time to decide what kind of ending this would be. And maybe, just maybe, they hadn't seen the last of it. But next time it wouldn't come to mimic. It would come to listen. She smiled faintly. Not all invasions end in war. Some end in understanding. Even if it takes everything to get there. And even if the understanding doesn't come in words, but in silence, in choices, in what we refuse to forget. She touched her wrist pad and deleted the message. Some things didn't need to be shared yet. Some truths grew better in the quiet. Some alien invasions end not with a bang, but with a whisper that fades into the stars. And some stories don't end at all. They just wait for the next voice to answer.